when I haven't talked to people in a while is to do 2 rounds, see how this sounds. See, the first round is do kind of a quick we both do a quick overview, so I don't, just talk for half the call. We both do a quick overview and then, kind of a quick check, and then the second round, do a deeper dive, whatever area we want to do a deeper dive in. How does that sound to you?
It sounds too controlling to me.
You always say that, Gary. And
I don't
sometimes I
like it.
feel because of
I
that, or we just meander all over the place.
I'm happy to follow your structure, but I may not stick to that fixed structure because I do not like being put in a box. It's just really rubs me the wrong way. So I'm happy to start off that way, but if it goes into different directions, I'm not
Okay.
going to hold you to it or hold me back or
Okay.
feel like being a bad student. I want us to be free with each other and not have to fit into a fixed structure. So yeah, I'll fit into that, but just let you know that I like to be able to be more open rather than having to keep like I feel like I'm a horse with blinders on. It just energetically feels upsetting to me to be asked to fit into a structure when I'll do it, but something else may happen, and I want to open ourselves to the possibilities of other things. That's why I'm saying this. So yeah, go ahead, start.
Sure. Well, I guess it's been since April or May since we talked, so I've had my whole busy season since we talked, and I'd say on the whole it was very fulfilling and pretty full on. I did cut back maybe a tad from last year with more days off, but it was a lot, but it was really good and felt great about the quality of the service I provided. And so now I'm in the slower season, which is welcome. I do some tours, but not as much. And yeah, definitely enjoying this pace right now. And one of my prime things is rebuilding, replenishing my energy supply, rebuilding my body. And Alex and I are in a good place. We still have our leelas, if you know that word, or dramas that come up. We had one just yesterday, actually. But, we have a lot of love and I think a deep connection and on the whole, very good communication. And I turned 70 since we spoke. I think you've got a couple years of me. What are you, 72, 73?
Next week I'll be 73,
Okay. What's your birth date?
27,
What's your 27th?
27th.
Okay. So yeah, turning 70 was a real celebration for me. And I spent a good chunk of the day on the mountain and really felt great about where I am in my life and how far I've come, and really felt so strong and healthy and so much enjoying life. The thought actually came in my head, maybe I'll go to 100. And of course, that's in the mystery, but that did come into my head. So I'm really, feeling like very fully engaged in life and enjoying life, and also really honoring the 70. My body's in a different place in its evolution than it was at 50. And I did make the decision on the camping trip I did in September to cut back about 30% next year, even call myself semi-retire and kind of hold it in a different way that is not going to be pedal to the metal, but I'll still get to do a lot of what I love to do, still make a good living and have more balance and not feel exhausted by the end of the peak season. So I feel very solid with that. And so that's kind of my overview.
Thank you. I don't want to jump in and just do my overview. I have questions and responses. I knew this would happen because I'm interested in some of what you said.
You can go ahead. You can go ahead, Gary. Go ahead.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
That feels better to me because then we can dive deeper rather than suddenly switch gears. Yeah, I'm curious. I have some questions. One of them is in you turning 70, is like a new stage or a new era, a new page of your life. How would you describe that in the fewest words as having a theme already said more balance and more time to be semi-retired, but I'd love it if you could dive a bit deeper without excessive explanation, just to know more about what you were not saying.
Yeah, a key theme I think is freedom. And interestingly, seven's a big number in Mount Shasta. I don't know if you know about the whole Saint Germain and Violet Ray thing. I think it's probably not really your sweet spot, but it's something I've definitely have immersed myself in at different times and more recently than I have in probably since the 80s. And definitely, that's about freedom. And so it really came to me that, this decade is really the 70s are a decade for freedom. And I think, I always focus on inside and out. So first and foremost is inner freedom. I remember I used to do workshops on living in freedom. And I remember one day sitting on the beach in Hawaii, and I was going to do a workshop that afternoon, looking at, how would I define freedom? And in that moment, I got freedom as being available for however spirit wants to move through this body. So that's one way I define it. I might define it now in a fresh way. Freedom would be uh, living from my natural true self rather than from conditioning,
Beautiful.
and trusting myself to express from that natural self rather than from conditioning or habit or
Mm.
fears.
And what specifically are you dismantling in your conditioning that you're able to tap into your natural self more? What's now releasing through you?
Great question. One thing I'm sure I must have mentioned in some of our talks early in the year is I did a really deep dive into trauma release. I think it was end of 23 and first quarter of 24. I worked with an old friend of mine on Maui who's very gifted at that. And I already had pre-established trust with. And I think mostly did release around my father's death, which was the main trauma of my childhood. He got killed in a car crash when I was 5. And I'd done some pretty significant work with that over the years, but there was definitely some more work to do.
Yeah.
And I think one of the best parts of the work is I kind of learned how to do it myself. And I did maybe 12 or so sessions with my friend Chandrika, and which helped me to learn how to release in a deeper way. And you'd probably be interested in knowing that it's a lot through sound. That's definitely been front and center, most effective is releasing through sound. And I've been able to continue that on my own. If anything, only gone deeper since then. So I feel like I've cleared out some of the residual trauma that was
Mm.
held in my body for a long time.
I'm really curious if you could take a minute to dive deeper and give me a little example or demonstration using sound of tapping into one tiny unraveling so I can get a more of an experience rather than a intellectual description.
Yeah, so let me give you an example. So one time last year, I did a session early in the day. Then my beloved Philadelphia Eagles lost a heartbreaking game, if you use the word heartbreaker apply to sports. And so when I was driving home with Alex, I could just feel like it wasn't overwhelming, but I could feel something wanting to come out, like sadness, if you need to put a label on it, I guess, deep sadness. And so what I did
Sure.
is I drove up on the mountain by myself, dropped Alex off, and drove up on the mountain by myself, and pulled out of the place I knew there was no one within a mile or so of me, and then just relaxed into the feeling and then just really let loose with cries and screams.
Yeah.
Does that give you more of a feel for it? And one thing I found, Gary, I've been aware for a long time, had a lot of blocks in my jaws and really around my vocal apparatus. And interestingly enough, I feel that's one of my greatest gifts is an area, but I think sometimes you have the greatest blocks where you have the greatest gifts. So anyway, what I discovered like a lot of times when in the past when painful emotions came up, it was I could feel it around here and it was kind of stuck. And what I discovered is that when I just welcome it and relax into it, just naturally, and often very quickly, it just releases through sound. Of course, sometimes there's limitations because of what's socially appropriate on the situation I'm in, or if there's people around, I do have some sense of not wanting to blow people away by screaming loud in a situation where it's not really welcome or appropriate. But sometimes I can do it through like I still have a duplex where I used to live before where I'm now, where I used to live full time before I met Alex. I still keep it as my office. And because it's a duplex, there's people on the other side of the wall, and it's pretty good insulation. But I am aware when I'm here of not fully, letting it loose at the loudest possible volume and respect my neighbors. But when I go on the mountain, and I can drive, just 5, 6 minutes from here and be at a place where there's no one within a mile, then I feel comfortable to let loose at top volume. And top volume is not always necessary to get the clearing.
Thank you. Yeah. Yep. And when you make the sound and the screaming or the crying or whatever comes up naturally, h- how does that connect with the releasing the old limitations?
Well, I really feel like, I'm very, very into somatic work, which I would guess you are. It's kind of everything you do is somatic based. So I'm, very into somatic therapy or somatic release as opposed to cognitive processes. So I really feel like when it's releasing from my body, it is a real release of the trauma down to the root, much more than cognitive.
Good. Yep. Thank you for diving deeper and for letting me disrupt your structure. I always feel that more present to what's happening right now rather than remembering what was spoken before, because I would be in a whole different place energetically. So thank you for your flexibility, my friend. And I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Gary. It was easy. It wasn't a big stretch.
Okay, good, 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 good. Ah, I'm in a good place energetically. And it's coming from my daily practices of nurturing, inspiring, empowering myself here on the top of the mountain where I live, with the combination of stretching and jogging and swimming and acrobatic sounding and sitting in the waterfall. You've probably seen some of my posts, and I get so
Yeah,
much
I think we had one
full.
conversation where you talked in depth about what you do with the waterfall
Yeah,
using
exactly.
sound.
So,
I remember
it
that.
gives me a real fulfillment that goes right throughout my day. And I love that. The most significant thing that has happened since we last physically talked was what I sent you the link for. I leaped into the opportunity about in August to fly to England and to make this 20-minute concentrated keynote of the best of my teachings with like just a minute or two for each story of the key tools I've developed over 50 years of developing my body of work since my early 20s, with engagement with the audience, with the slides that you saw. And now that particular keynote, that presentation, now I'm applying to different opportunities to be a paid speaker, which I never really focused on before. I was more the body therapist, the court jester, the awakening creativity artist. Never really saw myself as a keynote speaker. I actually felt I was more there to draw others out in a kind of a therapeutic mode. That was my whole training all my life. But I recently, through joining the Speakers Bureau with the same group, got accepted for flying to Saskatoon near Regina in the middle of Canada in the middle of April to present a Monty Python version, which I love, of taking mayors and councilors of this municipal association through their harassment with people who are citizens by doing it in an interactive theatrical, what I love and do so well way, and getting well paid for it. A 1 hour presentation, and then so they're flying me back and forth and putting me in a hotel. So I will be in your neck of the woods, that is North America. And now I've really been focusing over the last 4 months since I got back on developing my YouTube programs, putting beautiful thumbnails and banners there and also in LinkedIn, creating a new speaker profile. I might even have sent that to you. Maybe I didn't with the actual link. It's a speaker's profile that on one page has the best of me. And I'm so pleased that I'm able to now, finally, at age 73, be seen totally as a master in my body-centered specialty. After all this time, suddenly I'm coming out as a professional speaker in a big way. And it's, I'm applying to different presentations and I'm getting a lot of traction. And so that's been my main focus for the last 4 months is seeing myself in my elderhood, in my mastery, in my maturity as someone that beyond what I do online like this, which is, fun, sharing my vision and wisdom and message with the world rather than just focusing on doing it for everyone else. So that's been a real turnaround for me. And as you know, in some of our earlier conversations, when we first started to reconnect a year or two ago, I had this huge loss. I lost 800,000 US of my half of my family inheritance by investing in one financial scam after another. And rather than focusing on the story or the victimization or the loss, I am so in fresh stories, new glories, we dance and sing. Yes, we are remembering. Yes, we are awakening consciousness for myself and will not allow anyone who enters my universe to go on about how they're not the same version or they want to. So I'm practicing what I preach in a way that's putting me into a new zone of my relationship to being in mastery, in manifestation with what I can create from this moment forward on this earth. So that's my overview of what's happening right now. I'd love your feedback on what you heard. That's what I like,
Sure,
and
sure,
also your
sure,
comments on what you saw and heard and experienced with my YouTube video I sent you as well.
sure. Let me start with something, just kind of responding to the very last thing you said. It was
Yeah.
interesting. Just this morning, I was actually getting together with Alex, and like I said, we had a little Leela yesterday, and the the residue in me, I guess self-judgment is probably the simplest way to describe it, and that protection. Yesterday I was kind of in protection mode. So when I was getting together with her, and we'd actually spent the night separately, so we both had a little space. As soon as I walked outside, a phrase came to me which I used in different contexts over the years. It all starts now, and I really just embraced that. It all, and just coming into the present. When I met Alex, we actually started our time together with cuddling, which I think was fantastic before we got into things verbal. I just came in like fresh, not with, oh no, this happened yesterday, or what's gonna, what residue, what's gonna be. I just came in, okay, I'm just meeting my beloved fresh in the moment. It happened, we were meeting in bed, which was a nice meeting place for it. And, just the idea it all starts now and realizing how powerful that is. And, I come from a sports background and I use sports metaphors a lot. And another phrase that has came to me, I think, just in the last year, maybe the last couple of years, it kind of goes with that, is there's only this point. Like in most sports, scoring is cumulative. And if you get far enough behind, you're screwed. If you're in a basketball game and you're behind with 30 points with 5 minutes left, the game is over. You've lost. But I realize in the game of life, scoring is not cumulative. Each point it is new in itself. So you're always starting, to use the French. I don't know if you know about the scoring in tennis, but it all starts with love, which actually comes from the first French word "le" for egg. So you're starting with love, but it's interesting starting with love. So in the game of life, you can always come into each point fresh, with love, and you're not behind. You don't have to make up for playing bad on the last point or for 10 years of losing points. It's just all about now. So I very much embrace that also, and I find it's very powerful. So I wanted to share that first, and yeah, I think it's wonderful you're putting yourself out there, and wonderful you've got the stamina and inspiration and energy. Since I know to fly to UK or to fly to Canada, it's a lot, just all the time zones and travel. I mean, giving a 20-minute speech for you, since you've been doing it all your life, you could probably roll to bed and do that. But all the logistics around it take a lot. And it's great you have the energy for that, and probably not going to be wanting to get on a plane every week or maybe even every month, but to do that sometimes is great. And so as far as feedback on the video, what I would tell you is I really enjoyed it. I really saw your mastery, and I've been exposed to most of the content, and it was a good review. And if you're open to constructive feedback, I'll give you something from Alex too, who watched it with me. Are
Yeah,
you
sure.
open to that, or just wanting? Yeah, she shared she felt the hand, obviously you did a lot of movement with your hands. You were modeling that. And she felt that was a little bit too much, and it felt kind of too contrived and not spontaneous. All the movement with your hands, which felt kind of choreographed in a way. And was it actually all choreographed, or was some of it spontaneous?
Oh,
It was a mix, so there was some spontaneity. And Alex, she's a pretty keen observer in a lot of ways, and has had some acting training and stuff herself a long time ago. So that was her feedback. So since she did watch it with me, I thought I'd offer you that.
oh, yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's always happy to learn and grow. You can definitely teach and I call it an elder dog new tricks, I'm not an old dog, I'm an elder. And my appreciation of being an elder has sweetened my feeling of wholeness that I have. I never really felt whole. Most of my life, I was coming out of a wound of not being enough. So I was always trying so hard to get noticed through becoming the court jester or doing outrageous things. And my gesturing is, it's interesting you mentioned that because in the interview, which I did send you, that followed that particular keynote, the man who interviewed me who was also a stand-up comic and performer in his day before he became a very well-paid speaker, asked me about my use of rhyme and my choreographing the movements on the stage. And he gave an example which I found fascinating of someone in Canada who had the longest running talk show of anyone in Canada. And he was interviewing doctors and lawyers, and he would ask the doctor or lawyer, now watch, I'm choreographing my movements, or the professional this or the professional that. I'm consciously doing that in his show, just a question or two about them. And somehow he was able, from his practice, from his choreographing his points, to take one piece of feedback from the doctor, the lawyer, whoever they are that were in the other corners, and he would be able to riff with them, to monologue, dialogue, and interconnect and be playfully um, interacting with them for a long time, maybe for 20 minutes or half an hour, from the simple question. And then when he found out how the guy did it, he actually had structured, very carefully, methodically structured the ways that he would go down different rabbit holes with doctors, with lawyers, with psychiatrists, with farmers, that would allow him to have a structure to which he could improvise, and it wasn't improvised at all. It was and it wasn't. And so he challenged me, and he said, I see what you're doing is highly intentional, not to criticize you, because I think there's something to be said for it. And frankly, I find that most people don't know what to do with their hands, and I'm very intentional because of all my body therapy and um, springboard diving and gymnastic and track training. My movements, my messages, my words, my sounds are very practiced. They're not rigid because I move around a lot. If
Yeah,
anything, I might minimize from the feedback you gave me my moving around all the time. However, they're definitely not, what's the word you that what your sweetheart said?
choreographed,
What's that?
choreographed or contrived. It looked like
They're
kind
not
of you
definitely not
rehearsed it,
contrived. They're definitely not
and a lot of
contrived.
the
They're
movements were.
practiced. They're
Yeah,
practiced, but they're not contrived. So I have to take a stand there about it. And at the same time, I'm learning to be able to say more with less movement and less words, and in my life to enjoy more of the beingness than the constant doingness that was a lot of my own nervousness and agitation coming from the place of not feeling like enough. So I take to heart some of the wisdom of what she shared, and I also take a stand for who I am, who I art, because a lot of what I say, I've said lots of times before, and so it's rehearsed, and yet it is spontaneous. So
yeah,
riding that edge, I remember reading once about who are the most successful race car drivers. They're the ones that ride that edge between being right in control and being totally out of control.
yeah.
So I ride that edge. So yeah, any feedback on what I just shared? Another deeper layer of commenting on Alex's comments?
Sure. Let me first share kind of a more general thing, then we'll kind of get into specifics. And this is something that actually kind of crossed my mind earlier in the conversation when you said you
Sure.
prefer not to have a structure. So I had a period of my life, which I think I've told you about before, where it was totally free flow. Right after Princeton, I moved to Santa Cruz. I was part of a spiritual community. You know the phrase crazy wisdom in conjunction with spiritual teachers? Crazy wisdom basically means you do some doing different things all the time. In most spiritual communities, they say one core method. Okay, we're doing vipassana, or we're doing this, we're doing that, and you just basically do the practice again and again and again. So some people do it 50 years. But crazy wisdom means it's always changing. And we did have a
Yeah.
teacher who kind of was guiding that, and it was wild, it was radical, and also part of it was I had no money, no car, no bank account for a lot of it. I was just living totally spontaneous with no structure. So I did that for a
Mm,
few years, and it was an awesome experience and totally freeing and a great preparation for life. And then at some point, I left the community and just following I was still very much into following my guidance. That was one of the gifts of the community, was learning how to access my inner wisdom. My
mm,
inner wisdom led me to progressively, step by step, from being out of the world to being, as Jesus in his famous phrase, in the world but not of it. And eventually, the high point of the structure, I was running a nonprofit, which involved a lot of structure. Board of directors, multiple projects with multiple funding streams, and very rigid reporting requirements. I was married, I owned a home, so I was living in a lot of structure. And what I realized, and I also noticed on my trips to Mount Shasta and other things, is some of the people who'd been my kind of comrades and people I'd known during the free flow period were still in that. They were still living that way in their 50s or 60s. And I could tell they really had a belief that freedom means no structure. That if you just work seasonally in the marijuana industry and then make enough money to save the rest of the year just to get in your van or hitch around and free flow, I mean, that's really the life. And so what I realized at some point, and this goes with the first quote I gave you about freedom, that freedom doesn't mean lack of structure. Freedom means, or lack of structure or lack of responsibility. Freedom means following spirit, whether it takes you all the way out of structure or all the way into it. And feeling equally free in both. So I thought to share that, and I thought it was interesting that in the early part of the conversation, you really very strongly said, "Hey, I don't want any structure for this call." And then when you were sharing about your experience with this guy who was interviewing you, who I gather was someone you respect, he was sharing that he used a lot of structure.
Mhm.
So I thought that was interesting. The interplay between freedom and structure that and just for me, what's really annoying in me that freedom doesn't mean no structure. That you can have both together.
I agree. I totally agree.
I'll also share with you, Gary, that one time I heard this. I'll make this as brief as possible, but I think it's a great point. I heard a satsang. I don't know if you know who Gangaji is, but she's a spiritual teacher. This priest
Yeah.
was talking to her, and he said, I've been a priest for 20 years, and up until last week, every week I spent the whole week writing my sermon, rehearsing it until I get every movement, every inflection down to a T. And then I started coming to satsang with you, and obviously you don't rehearse at all. You don't prepare anything. You just come
Yeah.
out and it happens, and it's so beautiful. So I thought I'd give that a try. So last week I didn't prepare any sermon at all. I just, before I came out on stage, I said, "Okay, God, here I am. If you got anything to say, I'm available." And it was the best sermon I ever gave. It was true communion. And so before I was going to, I did a cycle where I was speaking quite a lot at New Thought churches like Unity and religious science churches when I first moved to Shasta. And before I was going to do the first one, I was talking to a friend of mine who actually worked in the corporate world as a presentation coach for quite a while, and so had some solid expertise in that area. Different angle than you, but he had expertise. And he said, and I've been thinking of just going out there with only the title. Obviously sometimes you have to give a title in advance and just letting it rip. And he said, why don't you have like 4 or 5 talking points? Don't have to prepare more than that, but before you come out, just have a list of 4 or 5 talking points on a 3x5 card, and so you have that level of structure. And I did that, and it seemed like that really worked for me. Rather than have no talking points and no structure, have those 4 or 5 talking points to kind of peg it around, but not to rehearse beyond that. And obviously, if you're getting paid a lot of money to do a talk and you only have a certain amount of time, I can see how you'd want to do more structure than those 4 or 5 points, most likely. And I
Well,
gather
it
for the K
depends.
Rich talk, you did a lot of preparation. You didn't just
It
come
it
out
it,
with
re-
4 or 5
it
talking
really
points.
depends. If, for example, I'm being paid to do an hour presentation to these, I don't know how many, 30, 40, 50, 500. I have no idea how many people are going to be in the audience. And I have a very strong, because I've been doing this so long, structure about how to set the stage. That's where my structure comes in. I'll set the stage basically by simply asking, let's have an example of the point of harassment. Let's give an example. So then we act it out in a multi-dimensional, multi-sensory, Monty Python kind of way, and then I do the application. This is my structure: point, example, application. That's my structure. But anything can happen within that structure, and actually there's a great freedom in that, and people feel wonderful safety about having their points be multi-sensorized and demonstrated through the body and through interaction. And then what are we learning from this? That then completes what I call the cycle of communication: one point, one example, one application. So I use structure, but I'm not fixed on structure. So at the beginning of our conversation, it's not that I didn't want to have no structure. That wasn't it at all. I didn't want to feel confined, which is what I thought I said,
Yeah,
to having to follow an explicit, exact structure. I want the
yeah,
freedom to be able to take the structure, which I do appreciate because I work with structure all the time and I use it a
yeah,
lot, and allow that as a stepping point to improvise. So
yeah,
pardon me if I communicated some sense of I don't want any structure, because that's not at all what I was intending. It's I want to be able to bend the structure, like
Okay.
Buckminster Fuller would do with his object, that you can bend it and
Yeah.
twist it and turn it inside out and up. That's
Yeah.
the freedom that I was calling for at the beginning. So
Sure. I get that. And Gary, just for reality check, so that 20-minute talk you gave in the UK, uh, did you have a whole script written out which you practice multiple times, or do you just have a few talking points? Like how much structure and preparation went into that?
I I first I wrote it down, then I practiced it, and I rehearsed it, and I spoke it, mostly just practiced it out loud until I said it so many times that I didn't have to think it out loud anymore. The thing that made it so easy for me was because I'm physical rather than putting it into a tape or watching the notes. That stuff didn't really make much difference. Even though I recorded my version, it was more because I had to keep it within 21 minutes. That was why I was
Right.
interested in keeping it to a certain physical
Yeah.
structural form. But what I did was I acted out that presentation probably about 100 times. I did it once in the morning, once in the afternoon when I was in a very resourceful state after doing yoga or before the sun went down, when I didn't have a lot going on in my mind. And I so much committed it to memory that I began to improvise on the structure so that it came and it flowed as though, even though it was clearly intentional and clearly choreographed, as though I was talking spontaneously and with the group. You saw I was actually engaging with them live with the talking points rather than just, this is my next point. I would do it, but I would do it because I've played that piece of piano so many times that I could take my fingers away from the keys and connect better with the audience. So that's what I did. And that's how I developed. They also encouraged us to memorize. And so rather than memorize, I practiced it. And it kept changing. I didn't do it the same way any time at all. It was always slightly different. And the last day, I added another structure to it that I didn't even think I would. I went, oh, a great way of by offering coaching to people when I give coaching to people about being a great speaker is the best speakers say what they're saying, say what we're going to be saying, and say what they did say, what they are saying, what they will be saying. So then I reviewed, oh, just to review the key things we talked about, and then I named the key chapter titles of the different talking points and the stories, and I never did that till an hour before the presentation. So it gave me a chance because I'd practiced so much that I didn't have a concern about forgetting what I was going to say, to ad lib and add new elements and constantly let it refine and evolve. So that's how it developed.
Right. And so it sounds like part of the reason you spend so much time practicing is because of the time constraint. It's
Mm,
often much harder to
no,
give a
no,
short
it
talk
wasn't
than a
just
long
that.
talk, and you want to make
It,
sure you
it,
fit in the time constraint.
no, it wasn't just the time constraint. I knew that I was going to the UK to spend $2,500 to purchase a product of a video. That's why I went. I didn't go just to speak. I paid my way. I paid for a product, and the editing for this product from the man who videoed it with two cameras. The agreement was that they would edit it until we got every word, syllable, sound, picture, visual aid exactly as we wanted. I went, you know what? This is going to be the product that's going to produce and present and promote and passionately, preciously uh, reveal best of me that I've been creating for all these years as a presentation coach in the shortest amount of time that people can go, wow, I see who this guy is. I want to hire him. And that's exactly why I did it over and over again, not just
I
for the
understand.
time, but for the product that would be people go and they go, I get what he's about. This is the best of him over 50 years in the shortest amount of
I
time.
understand, Gary. I understand.
Got
You
it.
don't have to say it again. I understand, and
That's what
I
I
can
did.
also say that in the course of my guiding retreats and guiding journeys, every one is different, but there's certain stories. Like for example, there's one place called Ascension Rock. It's my favorite place, and I've probably gone there over the last 12 years. Maybe I average 100 times a year gone there. So I've probably gone more than 1,000 times with clients, and almost always I tell a brief, like 3-minute story about the history of Ascension Rock. And it's the same story. And a lot of the words and phrasing I use are the same. I mean, how could it not be? And I feel like there's a certain mastery in which I feel like I do pretty well in having it sound fresh. You know, even though I've done it maybe more than 1,000 times before, I really do my best to do it in a way that sounds alive and fresh. And I think there's a certain mastery in being able to tell the same story, always have it, or the same joke, or the same whatever, and always have it sound fresh. And I don't know if I've even really thought about what the formula is for that. I get other than the intention and being connected with the audience for sure, and just being relaxed. Being relaxed and at ease,
Well,
and I do
that's what I
sometimes
wanted
make
to hear.
little changes, but it's fundamentally the same story I've told more than 1,000 times.
Yeah. When I'm teaching my presentation coaching and
Yeah,
when I practice this myself, I always use this metaphor. It's
yeah,
always the first time. So, for example, I never made those movements before when I said it. It's always the first. That was new. I never did that before. There's always some nuance of nuance that's
yeah.
available. And so when I can do that and allow that edge between, it's a fascinating conversation we're having between control and out of control, between
Yeah.
letting go of holding on to fixicity and also trusting the intuition that comes from spontaneity and also having a safety of a certain structure that people feel relaxed and are able to receive the information better. And so I've developed formulas. The PEA is one of my formulas. I love it. And when people have a point and they just are up a talking head, most people are, I go, wait, stop. Give me an example of what you said. A real
Just
experience
point an
or something that
example,
happens
and what's the
of
A?
your
So
point,
point
of your
an
point.
example.
So of whatever point you're making. So give a
No, I'm saying
multi-sensory,
what's the A? I understand what the P and the
I'm
E
going
are,
to
but
lead to that. So
okay,
point, example, application, WIIFM. What's in it for me from the audience's point of view? What's the learning? What's the teaching? What can we learn from this? So it universalizes the individual example. So Pumper says, oh, I'm never going to speak by shouting again. I just realized that structure helped me feel safe to be able to improvise rather than feel like I have to have no structure or a fixed structure. That is a fantastic little container for me. So that is the A, PEA, point example application, point example application. And it's a
right.
structure.
And the application is kind of customized for the audience, right?
That's the relationship to the audience. Another way of
Yeah,
looking at it is I, the example, plus you, the application, equals we, the principle or the point of view, the
yeah.
policy. So I plus you equals we. Duh. Example plus application equals principle. So there's like lots of layers here that are behind this formula because it's a formula. I even call it the P formula. Oh my goodness. Well, I'm appreciating that we're able to be edgy with each other and share under the surface things that are thrilling, that are filling, and things that perhaps there's a little bit of a feeling I need to take a stand about this, or gee, I can learn from this because, hey, we're both wise wizards with, so much experience behind us. We're about the same age and we've individuated in different ways, but it's not so different, the way our stand about spiritualizing life and giving devotion and clarity and meaning and purpose and passion and together is beautifully integrated from totally unique perspectives. I love that about our connecting.
Yeah, yeah, I thought that often. I mean, people I think used to say mistake sometimes us for each other because we both have kind of East Coast Jewish curly hair, kind of look
I
especially like
think
in
it's a
communists.
similar physical look in our faces. When I go sideways, I think there's a very similar look to the way you look sideways. I think so.
We're part of the same tribe. and and we do share some characteristics. So in a way, I can look at you and say, there's myself that just took a different path. And it's interesting, you took had a very different life path. You started with maybe similar kind of childhood in some ways in the broad upper middle class, East Coast Jewish academic, good East Coast school, all that kind of stuff. And both of us totally went way off that path, just took the road less traveled, and but we took different roads. We didn't take the same road less
Took
traveled. We
took
took
the
two
road
different.
not traveled, created a new path when there was no path.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Gary. I look at you and I admire your freedom and expression. Like for me, and yeah, I'm sure you can see this also. For me, I've been, I'd say, more restrained, more conservative in expression, and
Yeah,
you, you know, basically because of my conditioning and fears that have still been held, that are maybe a lot of them loosening up. So I've been kind of more conventional in my ways of expressing, and less outrageous. I don't
yeah,
think too many people, and paradoxically, the path I took, especially those first 4 years, was like totally out of any box and totally free and totally unconstrained. So I wasn't afraid to take that path, but as far as my expression and personal interactions, and let alone public presentations, has been, more the word conservative, or more kind of in the box.
yeah. And it served you in your own unique expression of your specialized self. It's what works for you. It's what you're
Right.
accustomed to. I've grown accustomed, familiar with your face, and it works for you. And me, I've become as outrageous as I possibly could. I know our mutual friend Vineet. You know Vineet Allen.
I do know pity, yeah.
Yeah, he's been one of my closest friends for 4 or 5 decades. I know him from Hawaii from 1980. And he turned to me because we meet I'm going to meet him tomorrow actually on Zoom. He turned to me, and he visited me here about a year or two ago, about a conversation to go. And he said, Gary, I have to say something to you, or Elijah, or whatever you were calling yourself these days. I have had many friends in my life who've gone different pathways, but I have to say, my friend, you are, oh my goodness, you've gone the most outrage. You're the most outrageous of all my friends. I'm not doing it because I want to be outrageous. I did because that's how I could find myself. I didn't do it for pleasing anyone. I didn't, at first I did do it to rebel because I couldn't stand being put into the box and you have to do this because that's how we grew you up, the best camps, the best schooling, the best education. I had to rebel from saying you have this is why we brought you up. I'm out of here. But after I moved to Australia, actually, since I moved here, then all that I've been doing in California and Hawaii and all Russia and Rochester stuff, all that wildness somehow reached a level of substantiation, being recognized as myself in my own right, not because I fit in, because I don't. It took me moving off grid and being in this silent place at the top of the mountain where there's kangaroos, there's no traffic, for me to actually accept myself instead of being hungry to be in a connection with this woman or that business part. It's shifted. And that's been possibly the largest lesson of all, finding my own oneness within my aloneness. And yeah, I wanted to add that layer to our conversation.
Yeah, and I would say, and I think you said something kind of similar to this in your own languaging earlier in the conversation, that your focus was very outer for much of your life, putting yourself out there and getting attention. Whereas my journey, starting with the inner game of tennis, which I read in 1974, has always been inner is primary, and the outer flows out of the inner. And I feel good that I've really, lived that deeply and really never lost sight of that the inner game is primary and the outer game
I love that
flows from
about you. I've always appreciated that about you. When I remember a number of times when I visited you, it was probably Washington, D.C., or sometime around the time that I visited you there with Silverwing, and you were following a lot of the political candidates. But your following the political candidates was coming from such a high-minded, prayerful place. I was always very conscious of how conscious you were about setting intentions for the good of all through these people that you admired, loved, respected, and basically were supporting. And I have to say, I've always appreciated that about you, Andrew.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you. Yes, so it seems like we're both, as we are in our 70s, in a really good place. And, we've had these amazing journeys, different but amazing journeys that have intersected at certain points. And I think we both have gotten to a place of just really feeling good about who we are and just enjoying our lives at this point as elders.
It's amazing. It's amazing. I've reached a place where, in one way, through online and now through my coming out as a speaker, after all these years of helping everyone else bring themselves out, like, duh, suddenly by having this new career of being recognized as a total master and I can stand on any stage, it's like, I've never done this before. I've never done a keynotes presentation like that in my life, ever, ever, anywhere,
It's amazing
never.
you haven't before.
I've done interactive workshops, breakout sessions where I involve people. I bring them up on the stage. I do it, in my scenario. But I've never done a keynote. And that was the very first time that I did that. And so now that I'm wide out or way out, now because I'm way in, there's a balance that I never had in my life. I'm actually happier here than I am out there. And it's totally reversed. My proclivity, or I should say my habit, or even my addiction from not feeling enough, of reaching out, 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 has morphed into the opposite. Now the in feels like where the real truth is, and the other is an expression of it's an inside job rather than a making up for a deficiency that I was feeling inside. It's taken me 7 decades to have this take place, this balance between being deeply inner and now the outer feels more natural than ever.
Yeah, Gary, one distinction I think came to me a long time ago and I still, think is valuable is I think most people come to this human life from a place of lack or deficit, not being totally fed from within, kind of feeling, bad about themselves or somehow needy and wanting to get that need met through their outer life. And it's a critical turning point in anyone's life journey when that shifts, when they feel basically fed from within and the outer life becomes an expression of what they're finding within rather than a searching for what they feel is lacking. And that's a fundamental threshold that we've been blessed to pass. And most people, sadly enough, I think never cross that threshold. The vast majority of people, I don't think they ever really cross that threshold. In other words, their whole life is basically seeking something from the outer to fill a hole or meet a deficit on the inner. But when one can actually, find what one's looking for in the inner, then the outer is just play.
It's amazing how that's happened. I know for me, part of this has happened through different shamans, different, and we talk about it on this session, different, sacred journeys that you know what I'm talking about when I'm not saying what I'm thinking of, and you are too. And that has opened for me the vastness of my inner landscape rather than who can I get entangled with for marriages, what companies can hire me, who can give me a blowjob, who can do for me the rescuing or the taking care of this inadequacy that I hungrily masked as enthusiasm was reaching out because I felt like I have a gift to share. Now I've shifted all around to when I teach this, notice a difference when you say the words, I have to do this, and I had this to do. So now I'm coming from a place of I don't care whether I'm reaching a certain dollar mark or a certain attainment mark of this woman, this marriage. I was married 4 times. The fifth marriage, as far as I'm concerned, unless things dramatically change, is the marriage to myself that I've been missing my whole life. I've been
Well, the fifth marriage is
exteriorizing
talking
as
to yourself, and maybe there'll be a sixth marriage on the outer, and maybe there won't be. But the fifth
oh, I
marriage
don't know.
to
I'm saying
yourself.
the number 5 because I like the number 5. When my mom was pregnant with me, she did a painting. And in this painting, it was a painting of 4 skiers that are all together, all lumped up together doing cross-country skiing on a hill. He was quite a good painter. And then there was a 5th skier who was way beyond the other ones, all alone on another frontier, on another hill, in the same painting, but clearly creating new frontiers. When my mom passed away, that was the one thing I wanted was this painting. The one thing I wanted from her was this painting. And why do I like the number 5? Yes. And why do I have a relationship to the number 5 representing to me a constant devotion to creating new frontiers in my own pioneering mentality and in setting new pathways for others? This has been the architecturalizing of the story of my life. And so I am that. I am that pioneer. And I feel most at home when I'm carving pathways that have never been there before, when I'm creating a new song, when something emerges from my consciousness that hasn't happened before, even if it's through the structures that I've created, this pioneering proclivity has created a tremendous freedom through individualization that now, with Pluto that's moved into Aquarius, bringing that to the collective, bringing that to the masses, bringing that to people who will hear it, and offering this in service to humanity.
Beautiful,
That's how
Gary.
I see how this has all moved in the evolution of these decades that we've both been journeying on, and how I'm personalizing it in a way that makes sense for me living in this body at this time for evolving humanity.
Beautiful. So, do you have time for one more thing, or do you need to wrap now? It's
Yeah,
we've
no.
been about. This
Um,
is something I've it's kind of come to me on and off for many years, and for some reason, the last week it came in fresh and strong. It's really the importance of perspective, especially I think all of us consciously or unconsciously have an overarching perspective on life. For example, some people might see life as school. Some people might see life as a job. Some people might see life as an adventure. There's many, some people unfortunately might see life as a prison, this human life. And one perspective, which goes back to the ancient Vedic scriptures, the Upanishads, is seeing life as play or sport. And interesting, you can use the word play in 2 different ways. Some people might see it more as a theater play, whereas God is putting on a costume, and other people might see it as sport, just playing. And of course, my background's in sports, and I'm very drawn to that metaphor of life as I don't know if you know the Sanskrit. You know the word lila in Sanskrit?
uh, play. Yeah.
Yeah, play. And again, not necessarily as theater play, but I think even more like Krishna came and he wasn't like in a theater play, but he was just playing, and the way he lived. I have a good friend who's a Krishna devotee. They call it Krishna's Leelas. He would just play with the milkmaids and play with everybody. He was here consciously as God, just playing in form. So that's a metaphor that resonates with me. But also what I've seen I might do more of is helping people to kind of get clear what their main metaphor or metaphors are that they're seeing life through and just look at it. Is that a metaphor that really works for me, that creates ease and joy in my life? And if not, if it's a metaphor that creates struggle and suffering, can I, could I possibly, shift to a metaphor that creates more ease and joy and flow in my life?
I love that. Ease and joy and flow. Yeah. In my Jewishness, in my connection with my ancestry, I saw a lot of suffering morality and a lot of struggle, a lot of effort, and a lot of trying hard. And I played into that for decades. And it's taken me most of my life to unravel this habit of trying, efforting, struggling. It never worked for me. And, I still have vestiges of it when I feel challenged and I put my heels down even further and I take a stand and go back and do, but we said this, and I get into this kind of rigidity of structure because we said so or we agreed on this and now it's changing. As I get on in wisdom, not necessarily in years, but both are happening obviously now at the same time, I'm starting to see the beauty, and I teach this as well, so I'm practicing and modeling it more and more, of perfect imperfection. We are all perfectly imperfect. And by honoring, someone else described at one point, what is true spirituality? True spirituality is seeing everything that happened up to now as needing to happen up until now to be in the place I'm at right now, perfectly orchestrated. The losses, the grief, the shame, the anger, the blame, the loss, the breakdowns, to be able to develop the character, the beingness, the soul, the lessons, and then from that, the great opportunities of emergence arise. So I don't see this ever ending. The body may end, yet I see the soul continues with these lessons about this divine human expression that then maybe becomes something that's not human anymore, yet still has the lessons and gifts of constant evolving. There is no end, there is no beginning. And so, in this, I feel a great freedom in this dance we're talking about today, this Layla between structure and form, control and being out of control, trusting whatever comes up and having a certain container that creates a feeling of safety. All of us, together. It's a beautiful dance that we're sharing and interweaving together, Andrew. Really blessed by our connection,
Me too,
connecting.
Gary. And so, listening to what you said, you were pointing to a metaphor of life as evolution. Life's,
Constant.
as you could say, a journey. Life is an evolutionary journey, which is a perspective that seems like it resonates for you and
Mm,
perhaps serves you well.
more than ever, more than ever. Yeah, yeah. I'm somehow reminded of a story once someone told me. It's actually 3 lines. It's not a story, just 3 lines. Someone said, "What's the difference between going to school and life?" Oh, well, going to school, you get the lessons and then you get the tests. In life, you get the tests, and if you're fortunate, you get the lessons. Then you don't repeat the test.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that.
Here's a little story I heard a long time ago. It's kind of in the same ballpark, a little
Yeah,
different twist though.
sure.
One time there was a young man who was talking to a very successful old man. And he said, "Old man, I want to be successful like you. Could you tell me the secret?" And the old man said, "I simply say that in 2 words, good choices." And the young
Oh,
man said,
yes.
"Well, how do I learn how to make good choices?" And the old man said, "That's even simpler, one word, experience." Well, how to get experience? That's 2 words again, bad choices.
I remember this. It was told to me years ago. I love this one. Yes.